Thank you for coming. My name is Ken Kubo, and I'm a professor of biology and biotechnology at American River College. This is a two-year college. It's a community college in Sacramento. So how many of you are anyone from a community college? All right, a few of us. Great, great. So some of the things I'm going to describe to you today relate to that, but also if you're from a four-year college, or I've had some people from beyond college, I think there'll be some things that will be useful for you. So I've been at American River College for this is my 16th year, and so as part of the job of being a professor, I've had my share of recommendation letters, both to write and also to review. I've been on hiring committees and also evaluate interviews for other interview recommendation letters for other purposes. And so from that perspective, I'll tell you more about recommendation letters and how to ask someone for a recommendation letter. And this is sort of a personal story. It's from my perspective, so it is my perspective. But some of the things that I've learned from my students and from others, hopefully will apply to you as you look for a recommendation letter or as you review recommendation letters. Okay, I have my contact information on here, and also I have a website for our program if you're interested in learning more about that, and also I have a Twitter page. So, okay, and some of you, I showed some of this to you earlier. I have a copy of this presentation. It's at this website. It's http and bit.ly bit.ly and then Kubo PHSA13. So that's the shortcut link to a copy of this presentation, so you can download it and share it if you like. Okay. And feel free to ask me any questions. You can ask me anything. I sort of feel this is your time to find out more about recommendation letters from my perspective, right, from the person who has to write them for you. And so if there's anything that's on your mind about that, let me know. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the importance of recommendation letters, and a lot of you are probably aware of that. I'm also going to talk about how to get ready for recommendation letters. So there's actually a process that you can do to help yourself prepare for that. Okay. Also, how to ask, and a lot of students are intimidated by that aspect, right? And so I'll go over some of the ways that students have asked me for recommendation letters. Also, there's helpful information that you can provide the recommender, and I'll go over that with you. I'll show you some examples. Most of them are from letters that I've written about some of the things that I put into my letters, okay, that relate to what I'll talk about. And then also there is things that happen after the letter. So even after you get your letter, even after you get successfully accepted into your program, there are some things that follow up afterwards that are also important to keep in mind. So I'll mention those. Okay. So why letters are important? As a lot of you know, this is important for graduate and professional school applications, and I'm sure a lot of you are in that process or thinking about that process. How many of you are planning to go to med school? All right, quite a few. There are a few of us. What about dental school, or nursing, pharmacy, PA, graduate school? Anywhere else? Just here. Okay. All right. So, but there's other things, other areas where letters are important. Now, one thing I'm going to emphasize is that the reason why we look to recommendation letters is that it helps to provide more information about the applicant, more than just the grades, how they do well in the class, how they perform in a class, and so helps to present a more complete picture of that student. That's something that I'm going to bring up as we go through this and show you how that applies to letters. It's also important for scholarship or grant applications. Okay, so I often have to write letters for students who are looking for scholarships at our college, or I have to seek letters. Actually, I'm seeking letters right now because we have a grant that's due at the end of the week if the government ever reopens, and And so we're actually in the process of getting letters to support our grant. Okay. Also for internships, I often have to write letters for students who are seeking internships, or I review letters for applicants for some internships that we sponsor. Okay, so again, it's an important process in that. Also for employment applications. Right, so when you seek employment, it's not unusual to have to submit a letter of recommendation, or have someone submit a letter of recommendation for you. Okay, so that's also important. One thing that is apparent from all these examples is that you'll never be able to escape recommendation letters, right? Throughout your life, you're always going to have to ask for a recommendation letter, or you'll have to review someone's recommendation letter, or you may even have to write a recommendation letter. Okay, so it's kind of a process of life in our careers. Okay, so it's good to think about what a recommendation letter can do, what a good one can do, and how to bring that about. So as I mentioned earlier, a good letter can provide a more complete and I think more accurate and better view of an individual than just the academic record. So more than just the class grade or GPA. What a good letter can do, and this is something that I'll try to point out, is that a good letter can help reviewers know you as a person. Okay? And so what we're finding is that what really makes an individual valuable for an organization, or for a college, for a graduate program, medical program, professional program, okay? What makes them really valuable is not necessarily how well they do in a class, but how they are as a person. How is it to work with them day by day? And that really can really come out in a good letter of recommendation. As I mentioned, I teach biotechnology, and we have a lot of interaction with employers. And what they have told us more and more is that although they can hire really good scientists for their laboratories, for their workplaces, right, they're having more of a challenge of hiring people that are easy to work with. A lot of the work now in industry, in the workplace, involves being able to collaborate with other people, being able to work in groups, okay? And that depends on what we call soft skills, right? So these are the other skills that come into play, that how you relate as a person to other people, how you communicate, those other aspects which are important that don't get captured by your transcript, but can get captured, can be enhanced by a good letter. Okay. I had a question. Is there a pointer on this?
It won't work with the screen.
Okay. All right. All right. Okay. So a good letter can emphasize professional skills or soft skills, and that's becoming very, very important. Just to share with you another anecdote. So one employer hired 3 of our students, right? And during that process, they actually tested them out for a summer internship, and they ended up hiring them. But during that process, they actually went over with us, how the strengths and the challenges for each of the interns. And over again, what we heard about the challenges, not necessarily how well they performed scientifically, but it was all based on soft skills, like how they communicate with their supervisors, okay? How they do a presentation, right? So not necessarily things that we emphasize in our classes, although now we're going to, but a lot of it related to soft skills. Okay, so that's really important. So let me go over, again, this is my personal perspective about why professors write letters. Okay, and so one thing that professors are very interested in doing is supporting students beyond the classroom and course. Right, so we really want our students to use what they learned in our classes beyond the classroom, right? And one thing that's tied into that is that we really want students to succeed. And the term that we use for this is student success, right? Student success. And that's actually becoming a more important word in both at the community college and at four-year colleges, because we are becoming more and more accountable to student success in various ways. In fact, there's legislation now about student success that's trickling through the community colleges, and we're actually having to change the way we do things a bit to accommodate student success. At a four-year college, we're hearing increasingly about how the success of a college is not judged by necessarily what they teach, but what students can do afterwards with what they learn in the classes. And that often gets translated into what kind of jobs they can find. So can you, let's say after you get a degree at a four-year college, are you able to find a job? And how much does that job pay? Right? And so there's talk about actually using that as a criteria for judging how effective a four-year college is. Right? So tied into that are recommendation letters, because we know that that's an important step in being able to help you enhance your career, or find that job that will help make you successful. Okay, so this is just to say that on our end, right, there is an incentive for us, strong incentive for us to write you a good letter, and we want to help you in your education, in your career advancement, in writing a good letter for you. Okay. All right, so now I want to go over a bit about before you ask, right? So there's actually a process before you even ask a professor, right, for a letter of recommendation. And one of the key points here is that when you ask a professor for a letter, you want to make sure that you get a good letter of recommendation. And part of that process of getting a good letter is being able to get to know your professor better. Okay? And there are various ways that you can do this. Now, again, because this is my personal perspective, so I'm going to sort of share with you what I've experienced with my students. Okay? And some of this may apply to you. Some of this you may adapt in a different way. But I just want to share the experiences that my students and I have had in terms of this journey in advancing their education and career. So an obvious way to get to know your professor is during office hours. Okay, and so many professors have office hours. I'm starting to hear from students where it's not their professors that have office hours, but their TAs that have office hours. Okay, as I know that's kind of a challenge, but a lot of professors have those office hours, and it's a perfect time for you to get to interact with your professor, right? Because if they have office hours, we're required to actually sit there. We're actually required to be there. That's part of our hours at being in the college, and so we like to make that productive for our students, and so it's always great to have students that come by and ask us questions. Now, a lot of us think about office hours as being a time to ask questions about class, and that's important. But also, we're also as a professor, I'm curious to know what my students are going to do with the knowledge they learn. Like, what are their future plans? What school they want to go to? What career they want to get? And those are things that that you can find out about, that I can find out about, that you can tell your professor during office hours. It's the perfect time to do that, and that sort of lays the groundwork for getting that letter, because we get to know more about you, and we can craft our letter as a professor to where you want to go, where you want to end up. Okay. As I mentioned, I teach biotechnology. I teach lab classes. And I know a lot of you are in the science field, and so you probably are taking or have taken a lot of lab classes or will take a lot of lab classes. And lab classes turn out to be a really good time to get to know your professor. When we do experiments, there's often some downtime. Okay, and so that's a perfect time to ask questions or to tell more about what you're up to or what you want to do. Also, before and after class, like when we're setting up a lab or when we're actually cleaning up a lab, I often have students who linger around, and we get a chance to talk, and I get to know them better. Okay. Something else that's important is you want to try to do this early. Get to know your professor early, because the longer that you know your professor, the stronger the letter will be. Okay. So the longer that a student knows me, the better I can make that letter because I know more about that student, and I can bring up things that I wouldn't otherwise know just because I haven't known that student long enough. So having that relationship, having that time relationship is important. Also, I should say this: you might find out that you thought that this professor would be a good one to write a letter for you, but you may find out that maybe that's not the case. Right? Maybe you're better off with another professor, right? So that relationship can help in that process. Okay. Now I'm going to sort of depart a little bit and talk about something else that I think is important in getting a good letter recommendation. And that is having more contact with a professor, right, with a professor I'd like to work with, and to try to do that outside the classroom. So in student clubs or special projects or other campus activities, I think that's important. And I'm going to tell you about the ways that my students have interacted with me outside the classroom. Okay? And hopefully some of these ideas can spark something in you about ways that you can engage in these sorts of activities. I've been here since the morning, and I've had a chance to talk with several students about recommendation letters and how do they get to know the professor better. And it's not always going to be the way I present it, but there are creative ways, even at four-year schools, to be able to get that one-on-one interaction with a professor and to do special projects and things that can really enhance what a professor knows about you. Okay. So as far as special projects, some examples that come up, and this is for a two-year college, but there's probably similar programs on four-year campuses. One is work experience. Okay, so work experience or internships. Okay, those are important. Not only because it looks good on your resume, it does, right? But also allows you to apply skills and knowledge that you've learned in the classroom into a different context. Helps you to deepen those connections, deepen that knowledge, develop your skills. And as a professor, that's actually really important because I can see how that student has used what they learned in my classroom to something that further develops them. Okay. At the community college, we actually have a work experience program where we try to align students with different internship or work experience opportunities. And I know that there are four-year colleges that have some similar programs to that. Okay. Something else that I want to emphasize, because I've recently been more involved with this, thanks to my students, are student clubs. And I know that student clubs often don't get a lot of recognition in academic circles, but I want to try to make a case that they're really important. They can be really important for you in terms of developing your skills and knowledge outside the classroom, and also getting to know faculty and working with faculty one-on-one. Okay? So again, why these experiences are important. One is that it gives you that one-on-one interaction with an instructor, an advisor, or supervisor. Okay? So in my case, right, I advise student clubs, and so my students often have to kind of guide me about what I should be doing, where I should be going, what I should be organizing, helping to organize for their club activities, right? And so it's a good way for me to get to know a student better, and also they get to know me better, and we get to work together on projects together. Okay. Also, as I mentioned, these experiences allow you to gain that knowledge and skills that will build upon your classroom experience. And as a professor, that's really rewarding for me to see my students do. That they can use something they learned in my class to help them go beyond, right? Do something more, right? And apply what they've actually learned to some other area. Okay? And so kind of makes me feel like maybe I'm doing my job and helping them out in the classroom, and I get to see them really use that for something that that is rewarding to them. Now I'm going to show you some examples. So again, these are personal examples, okay? But just to kind of spark in your mind things that might be of interest to you. So I'm an advisor for, we have a biotechnology club on our campus because I teach biotechnology. And this is all student initiated, right? So this club would not exist without a group of students saying, you know, we want to have a club, right? And in order to have a club on our campus, they need a faculty advisor, so they got me. And each semester we have to do this, okay? There has to be a group of students that want to do this, and then they have to sign me up as an advisor, right? And so it's all in the power of students, right? So this is something that you can do right now. Okay? I know that at UC Davis they have a biotechnology club, and you know that's a perfect opportunity for a group of students to be able to bolster that club and get that going in terms of activities that can really help them out. So the types of activities that go on in our club, we do education outreach. So here's a workshop that we did at Sac State. Right? So this is one of the students that's leading the workshop. We've done field trips. This is actually close by. This is a field trip that we took to the UC Davis Genome Center. Okay? And then we also do some special lab projects. So one of our favorites is to make things glow in the dark. So we genetically engineered bacteria to glow in the dark, so or just to fluoresce. We do things like that. Right? So again, this is a good way to apply what you've learned in the classroom to beyond. Right? So again, this is in your hands. You can start something. This happened to us recently. So I had nothing to do with this. This is just a group of students that got together and decided they wanted to do something. And so I teach at a tier college, at a community college. And so as a lot of you know, right, not a lot of research goes on. Not a lot of science research goes on at a community college. Right? It's all pretty much at four-year colleges, universities. Okay? But there was a group of students that say, well, we want to do some research projects. At a community college campus, we want to do some research projects. So they started a club. They started a research club. This is from one of their initial meetings. They have their club officers. And of course, in order to have a club, they need to have advisors. So they got us. All right, so here is this is a physics professor. This is me, right? I think what really sold us was the t-shirts. So we have our club t-shirts, right? So now what we're doing is we're designing research projects. And in fact, we're writing a grant, a college grant to try to fund some of the projects that these students want to do. Okay. Here's another student-run project. This is called the North Valley Biotech Education Collaborative. So there was a group of students that wanted to do outreach, education outreach. I was talking to another student who does a lot of outreach work. And one of the things that we realized was that this is actually very, very important for what you want to do in the future, because you are going to be working with the public. You're going to be working with the community. And so this is a perfect way to see how that goes for you. And a lot of people really find that they love this kind of work. Right? Like our students really like doing this. And that just reaffirms to you, also reaffirms to where you want to go, the people that you're applying to, that you know you're someone who really can do this type of work, right? So it's a good experience in that regard. So what these students did was they started a biotechnology outreach program to work with high schools. So here is one student working at a career fair with high school students. This is at one of the high schools in our area. They also design these lab kits that they can bring to high school classrooms, right? And so this is one of them, and this is a high school that's in our area, and also this is what's really neat is that these students have learned enough. So there's a couple of students here that they've learned enough where not only can they do these lab activities, but they can teach others. In fact, they can teach teachers. And so they helped organize a high school teacher workshop. So these are all high school teachers back here. And they showed them how to do these biotechnology labs. Then they use these kits and bring them to their high school classrooms to work with their students. Right? So it's a really, really good project. Of course, they needed money for this. And so that's where people like me got drawn in. So we actually had to write the grants to get the money so they can do this, all right? So, but they actually run the day-to-day operation. Okay? So again, great experience for them, right? And this is something that, you know, I mean, maybe at a smaller level, this is something that you can start. Right? And these are some other things. So here's another workshop. Anyone from Delta College? Delta College? That's right. So this is Delta College right here. Here's another high school classroom. This is Sac State. They ran a biotechnology table at Sac State for one of their outreach events. Okay, so again, a lot of ways that you can get involved with the community. Again, this is just an idea. So this is apart from the research club, but just a group of students wanted to do this. They asked me to use they asked if they can use my laboratory classroom, and they bought a bunch of common foods that you'd find. Okay, so and then some of you may recognize this. There's one piece of my equipment here, right here. Does anyone recognize what that is? Know what that is? That's a PCR machine. It's a thermocycler. So it's able to process DNA and do DNA testing. Okay, so the reason why the food is here is that they're interested in GMOs. So people heard of GMOs, right? Genetically modified organisms. Okay, a lot of the food that we eat now, especially processed food, is genetically modified. And so these students want to design a test, a DNA test, that can detect whether or not your food was genetically modified. Okay? And so they developed a way to extract the DNA, right, the DNA from these items. Okay? Does anyone know what kind of DNA, or where that DNA comes from, what organism? If it's like pancakes, or this gives away? Yeah, some kind of grain. So if it's used to make muffins, corn muffins, corn, yes, all right. So most of the corn in processed foods now is genetically modified. Okay, and so they developed the DNA test. They isolated the DNA from these items, then they designed a DNA test for this using the thermocycler, the PCR machine. So now they have a PCR test. Okay, and so these bands here, right, can tell them whether or not the food is genetically modified. Okay, and so again, this is something that they started, right? And it was such a good idea that now I use it in my class. So I started to use this in my lab class. Okay, and they designed it on their. They got all the materials to design this on their own. So it's kind of like a homemade DNA kit. Okay. All right, I'm going to mention one more idea, and I always get pushback for this, but I'm going to mention it because in my field there's an increasing awareness to the importance of doing this, and that is to do a blog. So think about this. In the scientific community, so I do a lot of work in biotechnology, and because of that, I have some interaction with graduate students and with scientists. And one of the things that we're all realizing is that not only do you need to be good at science, but also good at communicating science. Okay? And one of the ways of doing that is through a blog. So now in our digital age, scientists are talking about 3 ways that you need to be in touch, to let yourself be known. One is to have a LinkedIn profile. So I think a lot of you are aware of that, LinkedIn. Yes. Also, to have a Twitter page. Right, that was new, but it turns out that scientists communicate a lot now by Twitter. They can share ideas. They can share articles, share research articles that way. Okay, so Twitter is becoming important. That's why I started a Twitter account, was just to be able to keep in touch with scientists from all over. And then third is to do a blog. Okay, and the reason why that's important is it shows other people the kinds of things that you're thinking about and the type of work that you're doing. So if you really wanted to show someone, like show an employer, the type of work that you do and how it relates to them, you could actually do a blog post. And it doesn't have to be anything very complicated. It could be like, let's say you did some kind of community outreach, right? You take pictures, say a little bit, put that on a blog. Or let's say it was a lab activity you did in your class. Like let's say you did a PCR, a DNA testing activity. Right? One good way to show either an employer or someone who's going to write a recommendation letter for you, right, is just to show them your blog post. Right? You can share the link to your blog post, and they can see instantly what you've done, and that gives them a good idea of what you are doing, and they can put that into your letter. Okay. So again, this is just something to think about, right? And because I've been mouthing off about this, right, I figured that I better start a blog. So I actually have a blog now. Right, and so you can see the things that I put on there. Right, so again, lots of pictures, and describing what I do. So now, if my dean is wondering where I am, I can at least show her my blog post, and say, see, I was doing something. So, all right. So let's get to the part that a lot of you think about, which is asking for a letter, right? So how do you ask for a letter of recommendation? Now, I've been saying how it's important for us to write letters for you, but one thing to keep in mind is, and this, I know it sounds sort of like a downer, but just to keep this in the back of your mind, you can't always assume that the professor is going to write you a letter, okay? And it may not be because they don't want to write you a letter, right? They don't think you're a good student, but there could be other things that are going on in their lives that prevent them from writing you a letter, okay? So you just have to keep that in mind. So for example, for me, like right now, okay, I have a grant that's due this week, right? So now would not be a good time to ask me for a letter, okay? But if you ask me for, if you ask me for a letter after the 17th, right, then that would be fine, okay? So it could be circumstances in that professor's life, right, which kind of hinder them from writing a letter for you, okay? And again, you want to think about which professor to ask. So I've mentioned this before. You want to make sure that that professor can write you a good letter of recommendation, not just any letter of recommendation, but a good letter of recommendation. And the way to develop that is to get to know your professor, right? So that stuff that happens before, that's what contributes to being able to have that professor write a good letter of recommendation for you, okay? Now, I always get asked about, when do you ask a professor? And this really varies a lot depending on the professor. So part of the answer is just kind of your perspective on this or that professor and how they might feel about when you should ask. But just from my experience and from some of the faculty around me, so this is at a community college, we usually like to have at least 2 weeks, right? Preferably longer, like 4 to 6 weeks is the optimum. Actually, for us as professors, it is true that we are absent-minded professors, and so if it's longer than that, sometimes we forget. Okay, so we often need reminders, right? But this is kind of like the working time limit for us. And I've just put up some examples of people who've written me, someone who wrote me, asked me for a letter. And again, it's just pretty straightforward. It's like, I really need your help. I need a letter of recommendation, but I know that you might not be able to write one for me. So, they didn't assume that I was going to write one for them. And they actually need it within 2 weeks, okay? And so I was able to do that. And just to show you why it's valuable for us to write letters of recommendation, it turned out to be for a program that did summer internships. Okay, and turns out that I actually had to write several letters. Turns out that the students did really well. And so when it came time for that program to renew its grant, they actually went back to the people who wrote letters of recommendation and asked them for support letters. Okay, and so for us as faculty, it's really important for us to interact with different programs, and this was a perfect way for us to get to know one of the internship programs in our area. This is actually at UC Davis. Okay. All right, so again, just to point out to you that it does benefit the professor, does benefit the faculty to write letters for you and to connect with these other programs, because it does pay off. It can pay off in the future. Now, a lot of you know about this, but it's surprising how often I have to ask for this. One obvious one is the due date. When is it due? Okay. Also, who to address the letter to. Right? I always like to have something or someone specific to address the letter to, and often that gets missed. Right? So just to make it really clear, like, who is this letter for? Okay. Description of the program receiving the application. So what is the program that you want me to write a letter for? And that's important because if I know what that program is about, if I know what the description of that program is, that can help me craft the letter to better suit that program. So, if I know about the program, and if I know more about the program, I can bring up certain qualities about you, right, certain attributes about you that really fit this program well. Okay, so it's good to have that background information about the program. Something else that's helpful. Students sometimes are hesitant about this, but if there are things that you want the letter writer to point out or to highlight about you, it's okay to bring that up. So sometimes students will tell me, well, I want you to point out this aspect of what I've done, or point out that I've done this, or done this research elsewhere, this internship elsewhere. And so that really helps me to be able to craft that letter for you. Also, I'm seeing more and more that there are these recommendation sheets that go along with the letter. So there are these grids that I have to fill out. Okay, make sure that those are enclosed, or that the letter writer has access to those forms. Okay, because that's important for the process. Okay. So again, the more information that you provide, the stronger the letter will be. And so there's some other items that you can include. One is a resume. Okay. Another is a statement of career goals and objectives. Right. So it's important for a recommender to know where you want to go, where you eventually want to go, and that often comes out in a personal statement. Okay. So for a lot of programs, you have to supply a personal statement. So many students will just give me a copy of their personal statement or part of the personal statement so that I have something to work from in terms of writing their letter. Also, a transcript or even a class list. Most of my students will just give me a class list. So, and that's helpful because if I have to write a letter for a particular program and they're asking for certain skills and knowledge, if I look over your class list and I can see that you have it, I can point that out in the letter directly. Okay? Because sometimes programs may not be able to understand from the names of the classes what kinds of skills, what kind of knowledge you gain, even though it's obvious to those of us at the college. Now, again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay. Some students have asked me about whether they should ask in person, for a letter, or whether they can email. And that really, part of it depends on what kind of the type of professor that you're asking. Okay, what they prefer. For my students, what they often do is they'll ask me in person just briefly, like, will you be able to write a letter for me, and it's due, like, let's say it's due next month. Okay. And after that, then they'll email me again with the details about the letter, right? And that's perfectly fine. There are some students that I've known that, I don't see them face-to-face anymore because they're out of town, and, they may just email me, and that's fine. But again, because we have that relationship, it's easier for me to do that, okay? One place where it is really helpful to meet face-to-face with a professor is when it comes to actually writing a letter. So if you really want to make sure you get a good letter, what some students will do is they'll come to my office hour, or they'll meet with me in my office at some other time, and they will bring over some of these materials with them, and then say, in this letter, can you bring out this or bring out this, and maybe I'll look at their personal statement and say, well, I think this thing about you would be really good. How about this? And so that starts a dialogue, a conversation, and really helps me as a letter writer to craft a good letter. Okay, so that's where meeting face to face can really help to get those other things that might not come otherwise in an email. And make sure you give reminders to your professor about the letter due date. Again, we really try hard to write that letter for you on time, but we are absent-minded, so we will forget. And so it's helpful to have those reminders. Usually my students will send me, like if they ask me a month out, they'll send a reminder about 2 weeks. Then that doesn't get through, then a week. Okay, so usually about that frequency, right? To make sure that they get the letter and that I write it. Okay. And again, this can vary depending on the professor, right? But just from the professors that I interact with, this is kind of what we like. Here's just a simple example of a resume. This is just kind of a common example of a resume format. But again, this has important information for me as a letter writer. Okay, so this is from one of my biotechnology students. So for example, I can get some of the experiences that they've had, right? And it reminds me of things that they've done that could help them in their application. Also, I get an idea of their skills. Right? And again, some of this I already know because they were my students, but it helps to remind me of things that are important to them that I can bring out in the recommendation letter. Here's an interesting one. They just gave a list, all right? And that was perfectly fine. And so that helped me to write a letter, okay? So nothing very fancy, but just a list. This was from a pre-nursing student. And I've seen this more and more, rating profiles. This is what I mean by those grids. So I have to circle which one or check a box. And if you notice, a lot of this relates not to how well you do in class, but how you are as a person. Like reliability, emotional control, okay, things like that, industry, personality, social values, okay? So that's becoming more and more important, and that's what can really be highlighted in a letter. Just to show you some excerpts, and so again, these other activities can become important because they can come out in a letter. So this particular letter was for someone who was one of the club officers for the ARC Biotech Club, and some of the field trips I described get mentioned. Okay. But again, these are some other things that come through in a letter recommendation, right? Those other skills. Also, this is where talking face-to-face helps. This particular student and I, we met, and through that conversation, I found out about what he wanted to do, and also found out about some other experiences that he had. So I didn't know this beforehand, but he actually had research experience. And since he was applying to pharmacy school, I found out that he actually did research in a laboratory that was at a pharmacy school. Okay, so I made sure I highlighted that. Okay. Here is another one, which is from another student who was involved with our clubs, and he also worked at the North Valley Biotechnology Center. Okay, did a lot of community work with high schools. Right? And what I like about this is that this actually was not a very good student in my class. He didn't perform very well, but because he did a lot of other things, and I highlighted those, he basically was able to go wherever he wanted to. Right? So he was able to do the internships he wanted to do. He was at a special conference yesterday, and so because of those other qualities, that helped to balance out. Yes?
How many letters of recommendation are medical schools looking for?
Huh?
How many are they looking for?
For medical schools?
Yeah.
That I get different numbers for. So I hear like two, is it 2, 3 or 5?
Two science letters.
Yeah, 2 science letters. Those are the ones I hear about. Okay. All right, and just to point out, Miss Manners is still right. It's good to write a thank you note, okay? And in that thank you note, you can also highlight like where you're going, what you'll be doing, and it's good to stay in contact. So for example, one of my students got a summer internship at Davis, and so I actually, since I knew the person who was evaluating internships, I wrote to that person to tell them that the student's really excited about the program, And then after the student finished the program, before she went to Irvine, she actually came back to the class to describe what she did. Okay? So again, that's really good at maintaining that contact. And also, the reason why it's good to keep in touch is that this is a request for a recommendation letter. And it's from a student who actually went somewhere else beforehand, decided he wanted to do something else. And so now he was in the process of asking for recommendation letters for a STEM research program. Okay? And then after that, he went somewhere else. Okay? So again, it's important for maintaining that contact. Okay? All right. Any questions? Yes?
How do you keep in contact with like a professor from your classroom?
Oh, how do you keep in contact with the professor? Yeah, so that's a good question. So one thing you can do, one thing my students do is if you're doing something that's related to what their interests are, like for my students when they transfer to a new school, they tell me that, or if they have an internship, they'll tell me that, or if they're doing something that relates to what they did in my class, like maybe they're doing an experiment that we used to do in our classes, they'll tell me that, okay? Or if they're applying for if they're thinking about changing careers. So it's just good. It's just kind of like those kind of updates about where you are and what you're doing. And that way I have a profile of where you're going and can use that for a future letter. All right? Yes?
Is it common for professors or whatever to refrain from showing you the letter? How do you ask? I mean,
They can do that because there is those privacy there is those privacy issues that can be invoked. But I tend to want to show the students my letters. One is so that they know what I wrote, just so that they know, and also in case they need another letter. If I somehow lose it, they can give that back to me. Right? So again, it varies depending on the professor. Yes.
How far in advance would you ask for a letter of recommendation?
So for me, ideally, it's about 4 to 6 weeks
Or like
before it's due, or let's say before you need it. Okay. Now again, that varies. Some students will want to tell early on that they need a letter, especially if they think they might not need that letter until, let's say, sometime down the road. So when they finish a class, or when they know that I can see that professor well, they'll ask for that letter now. Yeah, that's if you can reassure the professor that you're going to be needing that letter for something down the road, right? That helps, because I know that some professors are reluctant because they might not see that letter ever being used. But if they know that it's being used, then that's perfectly fine. At least that's how I view it. Because after 2 years, it's hard to remember. Sometimes hard to remember a particular student. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Yes. Oh, one more.
yeah, do they normally contact you? Like schools, do they contact the person who wrote the letter?
Usually not. Usually not. Only if there's a reference. Okay. All right. If you have any other questions, I'll be around for a little bit. You can ask me. Otherwise, thank you for coming. All right. Thank you.